Hey guys, tonight we're floating, literally. You're not on a dock or a boat. You're standing on a thick living raft made of mud, roots, reeds, and years of careful, quiet magic. You squint at the horizon and realize it's not land you're walking on. It's farm. This is a chinampa, an Aztec floating garden. And if you step too hard, it gently wobbles beneath your feet like a giant vegetable sponge. You're surrounded by a mirror of sky. The lake water laps at the edges, cornstalks creak. Somewhere nearby, a duck sneezes. You're ankle deep in squash vines and very questionable mud. And frankly, if this were a modern Airbnb, you'd be asking for a refund. You probably wouldn't survive an hour here. Not because it's dangerous, but because it requires a kind of patience most of us forgot existed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step carefully now, your foot squelching into soft earth that shouldn't float, and yet it does. The ground smells like algae, clay, and old rain. A low mist curls around the bean poles like it too, has a job to do. You feel the morning sun tickle your eyelids as it rises over Lake Xochimilco, and for a moment, everything is absolutely still. You look down, your hands are already dirty, you didn't even touch anything. Welcome to farming, Aztec style. The gardener beside you, he doesn't speak. Not yet. He's crouched, elbow deep in a pile of mud and waterweed, adjusting the roots of a young tomato plant that looks suspiciously like it's judging you. He hums a few soft notes under his breath, something repetitive and low, like a lullaby written for worms. The first thing you learn about chinampas isn't how they float, it's how they breathe. These aren't simple rafts, they're alive, built layer by layer, reed mats, then thick lake mud, then decomposed plants, more mud, and so on, until a spongy, nutrient-rich surface rises from the water like a soggy miracle. Each one is moored in place by hueho trees, willowy, lanky guardians that root deep into the lake bed and prevent the whole thing from floating away during storms, or feasts, or goat-related incidents. The floating garden is ancient. It predates pyramids and probably potholders. But the truly weird part? You don't feed yourself here. You feed the dirt. The gardener finally speaks. His voice is raspy, like a bird scratching sand with its feet. You feed it wrong. It goes bitter. You feed it right. She grows sweet. She, the chinampa, is female. Of course she is. He points toward a pile of dark, mossy sludge nearby. You walk over, only to realize it's not just sludge. It's carefully collected mud, harvested from the lake bottom, mixed with chopped water hyacinth, duckweed, and something that smells distinctly like fermented regret. He calls it tlali. It's not just mud. It's food for the floating field. And you've just been volunteered to spread it. The basket is heavy, the smell is historic, and with every scoop you begin to understand something strange. The Aztecs weren't just farmers, they were soil whisperers. Each morning, they walked these rows, barefoot or sandal-clad, inspecting the ground not for weeds, but for mood. Was the soil too sour? Too dense? Was it hungry? A hungry chinampa didn't shout. She sulked. The beans stopped flowering. The tomatoes curled their leaves like teenagers refusing to talk. And the corn? The corn just refused to stand up. So what do? You feed her. Not with chemicals. Not with prepackaged pellets labeled Supergrow 9000. No. You feed her with lake mud. With composted fish. With crushed bones from last night's feast. With waterweed and fireplace ash and yes, sometimes even human waste. Collected, mind you, not dumped. The Aztecs had dignity. It's a delicate relationship, a constant, muddy negotiation. You lean back now, wiping your hands on your tunic, and realize you've only spread one row. The gardener nods. Not impressed, but not unkind. He's already moved on, whispering something to a chili plant like he's telling it a bedtime story. Somewhere behind you, a canoe glides past. Long, low, and filled with more mud baskets, more compost, and a little boy eating what appears to be a roasted cricket on a stick. No one rushes. Because chinampas don't like rushing. You sit down. Your legs ache in that satisfying way they do when you've done something pointless but ancient. And as the mist begins to lift and the ducks start arguing 2 rows over, you realize something. You didn't feed the soil. You joined it. And tomorrow, it might feed you back. The sun climbs higher, slow and deliberate, like a tortilla puffing in reverse. You squint up at the sky, then back at the chinampa beneath you, which still smells like algae, compost, and that time you tried kombucha and immediately regretted it. The gardener stands beside you now, brushing the dirt from his knees with all the ceremony of a man brushing lint off a god. He doesn't speak much, but he gestures. And what he's showing you this time isn't a tool or a plant, it's a bucket. Specifically a woven reed bucket full of muck. A soupy, dark, almost bubbling mixture of things you are definitely not supposed to put on toast. You look closer, there are glints of eggshells, flecks of corn husk, something stringy that might once have been fish, and an unmistakable whiff of fermentation. This is not breakfast. This is food for the soil. Because here in the floating farms of the Aztecs, you don't just spread mud and call it a day. No. You cook for your garden. And today's special, lake bottom stew. You kneel beside the bucket and stir it gently with a stick. It makes a thick glop glop sound that's not unlike stirring hot oatmeal with regret. The smell is sharp, earthy, and faintly briny, like if seaweed had a cousin who quit music school and took up composting. This slurry is called mixically, and it's sacred in its own gross little way. It's made by dredging the nutrient-rich sludge from the bottom of Lake Texcoco, a mixture of decomposing plants, fish waste, and all the dreams of algae who lived fast and died young. Mixed with ash, crushed maize cobs, and leftover tortillas, it's then fermented in clay pots under the sun until it's ready. You ask how long that takes. The gardener shrugs. When it smells like it wants to be a god. You nod, like that makes sense. He shows you how to ladle the mixically gently along the base of the squash plants, not on the leaves, not on the stalks, but just into the top layer of soil. You notice the way the earth drinks it in immediately, darkening like it's sighing with relief. This isn't fertilizer. It's medicine. You keep ladling, your wrist starting to ache slightly, but it's satisfying, rhythmic, like spooning soup into the mouth of a very very picky relative who refuses to die and insists on being fed exactly at sunrise. Somewhere nearby, frogs croak. A heron flaps lazily overhead. The world feels thick and sleepy, like it's halfway into a nap and hasn't decided whether to finish it. The gardener pauses beside a patch of amaranth and gestures again, this time to a small wooden box tucked beside the waterline. You open it. Inside are rows of tiny clay tablets, each no bigger than your thumb. Etched into them are what look like symbols, dots, slashes, the occasional very suspicious squirrel. You raise an eyebrow. Feeding records, he says. You blink. Wait, they logged this? Apparently yes. The Aztec gardeners kept track of what each plot of land had been fed. Not just when, but what. How much lake muck, what kind of ash, even whether the chili water used came from morning or evening. Why? Because too much of anything, even good, squishy, fishy, fermented things, would throw off the balance. You learn the cardinal rule of chinampa life. Feed the earth what it's hungry for, not what you have extra. That hits different, because maybe you've been feeding parts of your life with the leftovers of your attention, giving your energy to what's loudest, not what's starving. And here's this gardener, this quiet, dirt-covered whisperer, reminding you that soil has moods. That mud can sigh. That squash vines respond better to sunrise slurry than noon leftovers. You finish the last ladleful and set the bucket aside. The ground around you feels different now. Darker, richer, like it's holding its breath in contentment. The gardener nods just once, then moves off to check on the chili plants. And you sit back again, wipe your palms on your thighs, and look down at your hands. They're stained. Not just dirty, but marked by the recipe of this place. A little ash, a little algae, a whole lot of time. Tomorrow you'll learn how even the fish in these lakes had a part to play. Tiny, shimmering, and tragically doomed. But for now, you let the sun warm your shoulders, you let the soil hum under your feet, and you realize this isn't just farming. This is cooking for ghosts. The smell hits you first. It's not awful, at least not in a screaming run away now sort of way, but it's strong, sour, briny, with a distinct note of fish that tried its best, failed gracefully, and is now contributing to society in the only way it knows how. The gardener waves you over. He's standing beside a small canoe docked at the edge of the chinampa, its belly full of woven baskets. You glance inside. Fish. Tiny ones. Not the noble kind that leap from rivers into legends. These are short-lived, silver-scaled, blank-eyed lake minnows. Dozens of them. Most already very much not alive. You crouch down, peer closer, and realize some are wrapped in corn husks. Others are buried under damp waterweed. A few are simply laid out in neat rows like they're waiting to be judged in the world's sleepiest talent show. The gardener gestures to a nearby patch of chili plants, thin, upright, gently trembling in the morning breeze, and says, "They like the bones." You blink. He's talking about fertilizer, of course. Specifically, one of the most quietly genius, deeply unappetizing, absolutely essential systems in the chinampa world, fish-to-field composting. Because in the Aztec floating farms, fertilizer didn't come from bags. It came from the lake. And sometimes it still had scales. Here's how it worked. The shallow waters Lake Texcoco were teeming with life. Tiny fish, frogs, insects, and algae. But many of these creatures weren't meant for eating. They were meant for feeding. Not the farmers, but the fields. Nets were cast just after dawn. The smallest, least impressive fish were pulled in, sorted, and sorted again. The best went to market. The rest, they were destined for the dirt. You follow as the gardener carries a basket to the edge of a squash mound. He gently parts the soil with a narrow stick, almost like opening a book, and lays down a few of the fish, each one tucked in like a secret. Then he covers them back up, smooths the earth, and hums a few bars of what sounds suspiciously like a lullaby. He sees your face. They don't like being alone, he explains. You can't tell if he's joking, because the truth is the Aztecs cared for their fertilizer, not just in process, but in philosophy. The lake gave them life and death, and both were needed. Sometimes the fish were allowed to rot in baskets before being buried, adding a pungent fermentation that enriched the soil faster. Other times, fresh fish were used to shock stubborn plants into growth. There was a system, a rhythm, a weird, watery wisdom to it all. You lean over one of the mounds and notice something strange. A tiny wooden marker, staked into the earth beside a tomato vine. Scratched into the surface are 3 fish shapes, a dot, and what might be a chili. You look at the gardener. He nods. That one got 3 fish, 1 chili water rinse, and moonlight on a Tuesday. You almost laugh, but he's not kidding, because chinampas didn't just run on science. They ran on pattern, on memory, on the belief that a plant was not just a thing, but a participant. Every fish fed into the system was recorded in scratch marks or memory. Every root had a story. Every harvest whispered back a report. Too much, too little, just right. You walk further down the row and come across another canoe. This one has frogs. Not alive, exactly, but not quite expired. They're dried, curled like little commas. You pick one up and it crackles slightly in your hand. The gardener raises an eyebrow. Don't eat that? You were not going to eat that. Probably. Frogs, it turns out, were also part of the system. Sometimes ground into paste. Sometimes buried whole. Sometimes boiled into a soil tonic, so potent it required gloves made from woven maize husk. You ask how they knew all of this. How did ancient farmers figure out that fish plus squash equals bounty? He shrugs. They listened. Listened to what? To the birds, to the water, to the soil, to the way a bean plant tilted toward the sky differently when fed trout versus minnow, to the way a chili pepper puckered in protest when over-fertilized with frog broth. You start to feel it too. The chinampa breathes, responds, and sometimes sighs. You crouch, take a tiny minnow from the basket, and gently bury it beside a tomato sprout. It feels weirdly ceremonial, quiet, like tucking a note into someone's pocket when they're asleep. Somewhere, a bird sings. Somewhere else, a duck laughs. And in the far corner of the garden, a heron lands with the grace of a monk who's very good at balance and very bad at modesty. Tomorrow, you'll explore what else went into the mix. Ashes, bones, even crushed flowers, and how Aztec gardeners built a holy compost. But tonight, you sit beside the chili plants. You press your palm into the warm, damp soil, and you think, this place is strange and old and maybe a little fishy. But the tomatoes, they are listening. By now, your knees are coated in a layer of Aztec topsoil so rich it might qualify as a national treasure. There's lake mud behind your ears, compost under your fingernails, and the faint, lingering scent of fish broth clinging to your sleeves like an awkward dinner guest who won't go home. And the gardener, he's smiling, not a big, toothy grin, but that quiet, slow smile of someone who's about to show you something deeply strange and completely normal to him. He beckons. You follow him to a narrow channel at the edge of the chinampa, where the water is still and dark and just slightly too warm to trust. You peer down into the reeds, and at first you see nothing, then ripples, tiny ones, then a movement just beneath the surface, slippery, segmented, and slow. Worms. Longer than you expected, fatter than you'd like. Dozens of them wriggling in lazy arcs through the water and mud. It's like someone spilled a bowl of living spaghetti and then said, "Actually, let's use this for agriculture." The gardener squats and gently lifts one out. It drips, it shimmers. It is, undeniably, alive and a little offended. "They're good for the earth," he murmurs and places it into a shallow bowl already half full of its squirming siblings. And now it's your turn to meet the quiet champions of the chinampa. The Axayacatl lake midges and their larvae, and their more wiggly cousins, the aquatic worms that lived, died, and decomposed in the very water these gardens floated on. These creatures weren't just accepted, they were harvested. Sifted from the lake mud, scooped from algae mats, even cultivated in dedicated corners of shallow channels. Aztec gardeners didn't swat away bugs, they collected them. Why? Because worms are nature's tiny composters, and in this system, they were farmed like royalty. Some were crushed and mixed into fertilizer paste, others were buried whole. Many were added to a nutrient slurry that was stirred daily, sung to, and occasionally spiced with charred corn husks. You look at the bowl, it's wiggling, and somehow you're okay with that. The gardener shows you how to apply the mixture. Not spread, not pour. Paint. Using a brush made of agave fiber, he swirls the wormy sludge around the base of the corn stalks, tracing spirals into the soil like he's sketching something sacred. And maybe he is. Because to the Aztecs, even decomposition had order. They didn't just dump waste. They curated it, balanced it, matched it to the needs of each plant, like pairing wine with dinner or playlists with moods. You try it. The brush is heavier than it looks. The mixture smells like wet pennies and moss, but the soil drinks it up like a blessing. You're beginning to understand this isn't gardening. This is compost choreography. Later, he shows you his worm baskets, finely woven reed containers, half submerged in the shallows. Inside, worms writhe through layers of waterweed, bark, and old maize husks. This is a worm pantry, and the gardener checks it like a chef checks spice jars. You point at one basket that's marked with a scrap of red-dyed cloth. "Those are feasting worms," he explains. "They've been fed flour dust and fermented ash." You stare. He nods. "For ceremonial chili, makes them spicier. You don't ask how. You don't want to know. But you write it down in your brain anyway under things that sound like lies but are definitely true." Some historians still debate how systematic this was. Were the worms truly cultivated with intention, or just a convenient side effect of wet, organic lakes? The gardener would probably shrug at that question, because to him, the answer's obvious. The worms lived where the plants lived. They fed where the earth needed feeding. They belonged, just like the fish, and the frogs, and now you. Somewhere behind you, a heron screams in a tone that could only be translated as, "I told you I wanted the other reed raft." The gardener doesn't flinch. He's focused now, mixing a new slurry, this time with ground worm casings, mashed water lily bulbs, and something that smells exactly like if a mushroom got emotional. Tomorrow, you'll learn how even temple ash and bones were lovingly ground and folded into the garden's diet, ritual meeting root in the softest of collisions. But tonight, you press your thumb into the fresh worm-painted soil. It holds your fingerprint just for a moment before it sinks back into stillness. And you think, this garden eats better than I do. And maybe, just maybe, it sleeps better too. You're not sure what time it is anymore. The sun is high but gentle, filtered through tall stalks of corn and the fluttering shadows of dragonflies. The air smells less like morning and more like simmering. Not heat exactly, but a kind of quiet, earthy cooking. And in a way, it is, because today's recipe includes something very special. Ash. The gardener walks ahead of you now, his basket swinging gently at his hip. Inside, you catch glimpses of charcoal flakes, bits of crushed maize cob, and soft gray dust like someone scraped the bottom of a holy fireplace. He kneels beside a patch of bean vines, reaches into the basket, and begins sprinkling the ash along the base of each stalk. Slow, even, deliberate, like seasoning a stew that takes years to perfect. You raise an eyebrow. Ash, he nods without looking up. Everything that burned feeds something that hasn't. There's a pause. Then he offers you the basket. It's surprisingly warm, not hot, but alive with the memory of fire. You sprinkle a bit near a chili plant and the dust disappears instantly into the dark soil like it's been waiting. And just like that, you're part of one of the oldest, most sacred traditions in chinampa farming, feeding the future with the bones of flame. Here's the secret. Ash isn't just waste. In Aztec farming, it's alchemy. The gardeners collected ash from cooking fires, burnt corn husks, charred animal bones, even ceremonial incense burners after temple offerings. Nothing was wasted, especially not what had already burned. Because ash brought balance. It helped neutralize acidity in overused soil. It added potassium, calcium, and a whisper of the sacred to the roots of crops meant to feed gods and neighbors alike. You reach into the basket again, this time pulling up a chunk of blackened maize cob. Its kernels long gone, its surface brittle as old parchment. You crush it in your palm and feel it turn to dust. And that dust, it's treasured. There was even a special mix known among chinampa caretakers as tlachinali earth, named after the Aztec symbol of duality of fire and water entwined. Tlachinali earth was made from temple ash, burnt bone, crushed corn cob, clay dust, and a pinch of water from the lake's edge during a full moon. For texture, of course. It wasn't just fertilizer, it was philosophy. The idea that destruction could nourish, that fire could teach, that the things you thought were lost could still grow something new. You glance around and realize many of the chinampa plots are labeled small markers made from bone or painted gourd. Some even bear tiny glyphs, for ash-fed, for moon water soaked, for fish-rich soil, for, well, nobody's quite sure, but it probably involves ducks. The gardener points to a section of corn that towers above the rest. That row was planted after the last eclipse, he says, fed with nothing but temple ash and river silt. You ask why. He smiles. We owed the gods something, and the corn owed us nothing. There's something in that, in the idea that fire and failure and old burnt things still matter. That even after the offering has turned to smoke, even after the meal is gone, the ashes remain. Not as trash, but as the next step in a cycle so quiet, you can only hear it when your feet are buried in dirt. You sit now, brushing ash from your palms. It floats in the air like powdered dusk. Somewhere across the water, a canoe glides by, its oarsman trailing a line of duckweed behind him. A child in the front tosses something into the water. You think it's a fishbone, or a prayer, or both. Tomorrow you'll step even deeper into the sacred, exploring how the Aztecs composted with help from the gods themselves, including a deity known for eating filth and turning it into flowers. But tonight, you lie back against the warm earth, arms crossed behind your head. You listen to the soft hush of the ash settling into the roots beside you, and you wonder, if even fire can become food, what part of you, burnt, spent, forgotten, might be growing something beautiful in the dark? The sun dips lower now, casting long shadows across the floating gardens like brushstrokes of sleep. The light isn't golden, it's earthen, the color of smoked maize and old river clay. Everything is quieter. Even the ducks, once chaos incarnate, now paddle with the dignity of minor nobles heading home from a long, respectable nap. The gardener walks slower too, like the weight of the afternoon is pressing gently on his shoulders. He stops by a patch of soil that looks darker than the rest. Richer. It smells different too, less like swamp, more like story. And when he digs down with his hands, no tools, just fingers, you see something strange. Layered in the dirt are fragments of bone, burnt flower petals, tiny carvings of what look like teeth. And is that a feather? You lean in. He doesn't explain right away. Instead, he speaks one name. Tlazolteotl. You blink. The word is soft and winding. It tastes like river mud and smoke. The eater of filth, he says. Ah, that clears everything up. Sort of. Tlazolteotl was one of the most paradoxical, least well-behaved goddesses in the Aztec pantheon. She was a cleansing spirit, a divine washer of sins, but she was also the one who encouraged desire, chaos, mess. She didn't fear impurity. She consumed it. And what she gave back? Fertility. Not the pastel flower crown kind, the messy, muddy, deeply composted kind. She took what was spoiled, tainted, discarded, and turned it into life. Which brings us to what you're looking at now, a sacred Tlazolteotl compost pit. You touch the soil. It's warm, almost unnaturally so, like it's holding a secret. Here, in the Chinampa world, certain areas were blessed to receive what the community considered unclean. Menstrual cloths, soiled offerings, charred leftovers from overcooked feasts, even things used in old rituals that no longer had a place in shrines. But instead of being buried and forgotten, they were given to the earth, with prayers, with song, with belief that Tlazolteotl would digest it all. And she did. The compost from her pits was considered some of the most potent in all the gardens. It was used sparingly, like spice, like magic. Mixed into the roots of chili plants grown for offerings, squash meant for midwives, and maize raised to feed dancers before ritual performances. You're handed a small gourd scoop and invited to contribute. You hesitate. There's something almost too intimate about it. As if this soil might know your name, or your worst thought, or your most quietly rotting memory. But the gardener only smiles. She's not judging. She's eating. You dip the scoop in. The soil is soft, forgiving. You pour it gently around the base of a young amaranth plant and watch as it darkens the ground, just a little. You wonder what stories live in that compost, what secrets were whispered into it, what offerings were wrapped in cloth, handed over to the earth, not with shame, but with hope that something better would grow in their place. Some historians still debate whether Tlazolteotl's compost pits were literal or symbolic, whether offerings to her were used agriculturally or simply ritually. But standing here with your hands coated in warm, fertile soot, you know the answer. Yes! Both, because in a chinampa, symbolism grows roots, and the gods don't live in temples, they live in dirt. Tomorrow you'll learn how Aztec gardeners cultivated entire crops by moonlight, believing that some plants only grew sweeter in the dark. But tonight, you sit beside the sacred pit, you close your eyes, and you whisper a tiny thing into the soil, not loud, not brave, but yours. You don't know if it's a sin or a wish or just a fragment of something that no longer fits. But the dirt accepts it, and you finally exhale. Because if even the gods eat filth and grow flowers, maybe there's hope for your compost too. The wind has changed. It's cooler now, slipping between the corn stalks like a sigh. The lake laps gently against the Chinampa's reed edges, and the frogs have started their evening gossip, low, rhythmic, slightly judgmental. You're sitting beside a small wooden platform now, not quite a dock, not quite a table. The gardener leans over it, arms deep in a mound of soil that looks less like dirt and more like dark cake batter that's been resting overnight. He grunts softly, then steps aside, motioning for you to come closer. You do. And that's when you see it. A grid, tiny furrows lined with sprouting green, each bed separated by narrow channels of water just wide enough for a hand. And beneath it, the freshest, most eager earth you've seen yet. This is the feeding zone. Not for you, not even for the plants, but for the soil itself. Because the Aztecs didn't just compost and hope for the best. They scheduled feedings, carefully, rhythmically, with timing dictated not by the sun, but by the moon. You tilt your head, he nods. You feed when it's full, never on the new moon. The soil listens. And just like that, you're swept into one of the most underappreciated rituals of Chinampa farming, feeding by the lunar cycle. Here's how it worked. Chinampa soil was treated like a stomach, and like any good stomach, it needed time to rest, digest, and grow hungry again. So Aztec gardeners, trained by generations of whispered tradition, would observe the moon's phases, not for planting, but for feeding. Full moon equals most active digestion. Add compost slurry, lake muck, and ash. Waning moon equals light feeding only. No bones, no fish, just waterweed or fermented grain. New moon, total rest, cover the soil, let it sleep. Waxing moon equals stir gently, maybe a sprinkle of flour compost if the tomatoes look grumpy. You don't know if the soil really listened. Plants? They seem to obey. Crops fed during full moons reportedly grew faster, fruited more boldly, and resisted pests better. Some gardeners even swore they could hear the roots stretch when the feeding was timed just right. You kneel by the grid and begin ladling a dark, gooey mix from a shallow gourd. It smells lively, sweet even, like overripe melons and slightly emotional pond water. You pour carefully along the edges. The earth doesn't flinch, it accepts. You ask what's in this mix. The gardener replies without turning his head. 2 fish, 5 frog skins, 1 pot of ash, a slice of overripe cactus, and moon water pulled just before midnight. You pause. Why frog skins? He shrugs. Slippery roots. Roots. You blink, as if that clarifies anything. But in Chinampa logic, it somehow does, because everything here is based on balance. Not efficiency, not convenience, but rhythm. The gardener tells you some farmers even tied tiny feather charms to their compost baskets, one for each phase of the moon, so they'd never forget when to feed and when to wait. Because feeding too soon, the soil sulked. Feeding too late, the roots withered. Feeding when the moon wasn't looking, you might as well be yelling into a pond. There's even an old chinampa saying, feed the soil when it listens, rest it when it dreams, and never interrupt a root that's talking to the stars. You finish your feeding round. Your hands are sticky, your sleeves are slightly suspicious. The moon is beginning to rise behind a bank of reeds, and the soil, it glows. Not literally, but you feel it, like warmth rising from the base of a story well told. Tomorrow you'll hear tales of canoes full of noble poop. Yes, literal noble poop, used to create the rarest, most respected compost in all the floating fields. But tonight, you sit back on your heels. You watch the moon reflect in the water like a sleepy silver eye, and you wonder, if the soil listens to the moon and the plants listen to the soil, who's listening to you? Maybe, just maybe, the earth is. You're getting used to the wobble now. The way the chinampa gently shifts beneath you, not enough to scare, just enough to remind you that you're floating on something alive, something that listens when you breathe. It creaks slightly under your weight, like a door opening, or a secret being offered. The gardener is back with another canoe, only this one smells expensive. You lean over the edge and peek in. There are baskets, smaller this time, lined with woven cloth. Each is tied shut with a red cord. And resting in the bottom of the boat, packed carefully in banana leaves, is human waste. Specifically high-status poop. Yes, you blink, then blink again. Tlacatl Kali, the gardener says casually, as if this is the sort of phrase everyone should know. He raises a woven marker with the glyph for noble house. You recognize it from earlier, a small palace icon, flanked by cornstalks and a reclining figure in fancy sandals. This is no ordinary compost. This is noble compost. And tonight, you're about to learn that even in the Aztec Empire, where death was sacred and tomatoes had opinions, there was still a hierarchy of poop. Here's how it worked. High-status homes in the city of Tenochtitlan, nobles, priests, scribes, often had dedicated waste collectors. These weren't outcasts. These were respected public servants who came by canoe to collect daily offerings from elite latrines, not just to remove waste, but to deliver it to chinampas, to fields worthy of such refined fertilizer, because it was believed that nobles, due to their better diets, more amaranth, ceremonial cacao, fewer random frogs, produced waste that was richer, cleaner, more spiritually potent. Some gardeners even claimed you could taste the difference. Beans grown with noble compost were said to be smoother. Chilies, spicier with a kind of elegant heat. Corn, taller, less moody, more likely to stand up straight during windstorms. You raise a brow at that one. The gardener shrugs. It's the diet. Nobles didn't eat junk. You don't ask what junk meant in this context. You're pretty sure it involves insects and at least one lizard. The waste was often mixed with fire ash, flower pulp, and fermented maize husks, then cured for several days before application. By then, it didn't smell like waste. It smelled like potential. And it was handled with care. Not just dumped, but dosed. Measured. Recorded in ledgers. Some Chinampa families passed down poop recipes, blending noble compost with lake silt and moon water in precise ratios. You reach down and help the gardener lift one of the banana leaf bundles. It's warm. You don't ask questions, you just follow. Together, you walk to a sacred section of the Chinampa, marked by a ring of smooth stones and a reed arch that sways slightly in the breeze. This area, he tells you, is reserved for calm crops, the ones used in healing rituals and birth ceremonies. Tonight, they'll be fed with something ancient, and somehow, exalted. You help unfold the leaves. The compost is dark and soft, with none of the harsh smell you expected. It's already turning back into earth. You ladle it into the base of the amaranth beds. The gardener says nothing. He doesn't need to. Because in this moment, you understand, this isn't waste. This is return. The body feeding the field feeding the body. A cycle closed not in shame, but in reverence. And yes, the hierarchy was real. But in the end, all offerings became soil. Tomorrow, you'll meet the temple ducks, holy birds raised for both eggs and compost, waddling between worship and water in perfect comedic timing. But tonight, you press your palm into the rich, quiet earth. You feel the warmth, you feel the thank you in it, and you whisper one back, because what was once private, discarded, forgotten, now grows chilly. You wake to the sound of soft splashing. Not waves, exactly, more like the polite paddling of flat feet. Rhythmic, measured, very much intentional. You sit up, stretch, and squint toward the far edge of the chinampa, where water glints between the reeds like laughter hiding in the shadows. And then you see them. Ducks. Dozens of them. No, wait. Organized ducks. These aren't wild, these are temple ducks. Glossy feathered, ceremonially bred, waddling in deliberate rows like they have somewhere to be and are slightly late for it. You stand. The gardener is already waiting, arms crossed, eyes tracking the feathered parade like a general inspecting his troops. They know the way, he says, and they do. The ducks march single file down a narrow ramp into a shaded enclosure at the edge of the garden, a wooden coop raised just above the waterline. Inside, a soft bed of reeds, flower petals, and old maize husks. And scattered across the floor, droppings. You guessed it. Welcome to the next chapter in Aztec soil magic. Sacred ducks and useful droppings. You follow the gardener inside. The coop is surprisingly fragrant, not floral exactly, but earthy and clean, like a well-kept greenhouse with opinions. A few ducks honk softly in your direction. One flaps its wings just to show off. Another stares at you like it suspects you're not compost literate. You nod at it respectfully. Because these ducks, they're important. Temple ducks were raised not just for food, though their eggs were prized, especially in seasonal feasts, but also for their manure. Their lives were calm, their diets controlled, mostly amaranth, herbs, and leftover tamales, and their presence considered ritually beneficial. Their droppings were gold, collected each morning with woven scoops mixed with soft ash and lake algae, and allowed to rest in shallow clay pans until the mixture reached a kind of dreamy, spongy texture. Not quite mud, not quite pudding, absolutely perfect for the chili fields. This one had squash and marigold yesterday, the gardener says, lifting a scoop of the mix and letting it ooze back into the pan. She gives the sweetest fertilizer. You are both amazed and weirdly proud of her. The ducks don't just produce compost, they participate. They're allowed to roam through designated rows of the chinampa after feeding, where they naturally till the soil with their feet, nibble unwanted pests, and occasionally leave behind tiny blessings. And when it rains, the coop is cleaned with flower water. Yes, flower water. Because even a duck coop that produces sacred compost deserves to smell like chamomile and crushed petals. You're handed a small gourd scoop and invited to help feed the ducks. You scatter a mix of cracked maize and squash seeds. They descend upon it with practiced enthusiasm, feet slapping, feathers rustling, voices unified in a chorus of approval. It's strangely beautiful and oddly effective. Some farmers believe that the emotional state of the ducks affected the quality of their droppings, that happy ducks made sweeter compost. There were even songs, short, simple chants sung while feeding, not for worship, but for rhythm. Ducks responded to them, waddling in time, dipping their heads, joining in with soft quacks. You hum one now, a few repeating syllables the gardener teaches you. It feels like a lullaby, or a joke, or both. And the ducks, they listen. A few even pause to look at you, tilting their heads like you might be the next featherless addition to their flock. Some historians scoff at this level of intentionality, but then again, some people have never met a duck who understands soil structure. You watch them move, soft and purposeful, trailing behind the gardener like little compost monks in a floating monastery. Tomorrow, you'll visit the fire pits, where leftover ash, ceremonial offerings, and last season's regrets are ground into a rich black powder and gifted to the beans. But tonight, you lean against the duck coop. The sun sets soft behind you, and you wonder, if a duck can live a life of sacred poop and purposeful waddling, Maybe you can learn to leave your own tiny blessings behind too. The sky is molten now, a deep orange puddling into lavender at the edges, the kind of color you only get when the sun is deciding whether to leave politely or stage a dramatic exit. The lake reflects it all like a mirror someone's dipped in syrup, rippled, glistening, absolutely unhurried. The ducks have gone quiet, the wind has gone gentle, and the gardener, he's kneeling beside a stone-lined pit, arms elbow deep in ash. Not just any ash. This ash is blacker than night, finer than dust, and faintly sparkling in the low light like crushed obsidian. It smells like burnt flowers and old festivals. You've made it to one of the final and most sacred ingredients in Aztec compost, from temple ashes to tomato beds. Here's how it works. In the heart of Tenochtitlan, temple fires were kept burning day and night. These weren't your average cook fires. These flames consumed offerings, flower garlands, embroidered cloth, cow, paper prayers soaked in blood, feathers, incense made of crushed sap and resin. And after every offering, the ash was swept up, collected in ceremonial gourds, and carried, not to the heavens, but to the gardens. Because what had touched the gods could now touch the roots. You watch the gardener sift the ash through his fingers. It falls like memory, like snowfall made of everything no longer needed, yet still precious. He scoops a bowlful and walks it over to a plot of tomato plants, short, vibrant, and absolutely thriving. With each handful, he dusts the base of the stems, speaking low as he goes. You lean in. He's not chanting. He's thanking them, not for growing, for listening. Because in the Aztec worldview, the plant isn't just a recipient, it's a collaborator. And when you give it the remnants of a prayer, something once offered in flame and song, the plant remembers. Especially the tomatoes. They were considered particularly sensitive, moody, sometimes generous, sometimes sulking for entire weeks if you gave them the wrong compost or failed to greet them before dawn. Temple ash always worked. Gives them dreams, the gardener says, tapping the side of his head. Some farmers even recorded which offerings had been burned for which ashes. If a prayer for rain had gone into the fire, those ashes were used on drought-resistant maize. If someone had burned an offering for safe childbirth, those ashes went to amaranth, the grain of midwives and nurses. You ask what happens if the ash is too strong. He nods solemnly. The soil gets loud. Not angry, not ruined, just unsettled. So they diluted it, balanced it, mixed it with crushed eggshells, sweet potato skin, and the fine silt from the lake's southern edge. You take a pinch now, it clings to your fingertips like a whisper, and scatter it near the roots of a squat tomato plant. Its leaves rustle. Coincidence? Possibly. But then again, you're in a world where ducks bless the ground and the moon sets the feeding schedule. Coincidence doesn't hit the same. You sit back on your heels, watching as the gardener finishes the row. The light has almost gone. Fireflies blink across the lake. A canoe glides past in silence, its oars leaving long shadows behind. Tomorrow, you'll explore how Aztec compost wasn't just a science, but a song. One sung to the beans, hummed to the soil, and sometimes danced out by grandmothers who claimed the earth only listens when you move your feet. But tonight, you let the ash fall from your hands. You press your palm into the warm, blackened soil, and you say, softly, not for anyone but the roots, thank you for remembering. Because in this place, the prayers don't vanish. They just change form. From flame to ash, from ash to fruit, from fruit to story, and from story to sleep. The night has fully arrived now, not with a bang, but with a gentle hush. The kind that wraps itself around your shoulders like a soft shawl made of lake breeze and old lullabies. Somewhere out on the chinampa, a frog clears its throat, once, loudly. Then, satisfied, says nothing else. The gardener lights a small flame, not a torch, not a lantern. A bowl, clay, soot-stained and ancient, filled with copal resin that crackles as it melts. And next to it, on a small woven mat, lies a bundle wrapped in maize husk and tied with a faded purple string. The gardener unties it slowly with both hands. Inside, crushed petals, bone dust, pulped amaranth, and something soft and dark that smells like the space between thunder and memory. You've just been introduced to a kind of compost that isn't recorded in manuals. It's whispered. It's blessed. It's the offering of a goddess. Compost of Tlazolteotl. We've met her already. The eater of sins, the devourer of filth, the goddess who does not flinch at the messy, the smelly, the deeply human. But tonight, you see how she was also loved not just in temples, but in gardens. Because composting, the slow digestion of what no longer serves, is her specialty. And here on this chinampa, farmers still make offerings in her name. Not grand ceremonies, no feathers or blood or drama, just a bundle of what's left. The last petals of marigold from the shrine deck, the water from washing prayer cloths, the husk of the final tamale from a funeral. Things small, things quiet, things only the soil would notice. You help the gardener unwrap the bundle further. It's warm. He reaches into the mix and presses a small clump into your hand. It squishes slightly. Smells like old rain and warm stone. You kneel beside a row of beans, tall, tangled, and heavy with pods, and begin pressing the mixture into the base of the stalks. You're not fertilizing, you're forgiving. Because in the Aztec view, soil isn't just fed by death, it's fed by release. Some gardeners called this process teochimali, the divine letting go. If a household had suffered a loss or a bad harvest or simply a long stretch of silence, they might bundle the symbols of that grief, offer them to Tlazolteotl, and then bury them. In the garden, in the roots, so that the beans might understand and choose to grow anyway. You look around and notice this isn't the only offering site. Scattered among the chinampa are small sacred mounds, no taller than a duck, no wider than a canoe, each marked with a feather or a painted stone. Not graves, not shrines, but digesters, tiny places where sorrow was composted, not erased but transformed. She makes flowers from filth, the gardener says, and you believe him, because the beans sway as if they've heard something old and kind. The soil seems to hum, and that smell, that almost forgotten perfume of burning copal and crushed amaranth, wraps around your heart like a story that knows how it ends, but still tells itself slowly. Some historians claim this practice was symbolic only, a metaphor. But the soil? It never cared about academic debates. It just opened its mouth and received. Tomorrow you'll climb into a canoe used for nighttime farming, where lettuce is harvested by moonlight and the silence is louder than any prayer. But tonight, you sit beside the little fire, you watch the smoke curl toward the stars, and you remember, not everything sacred is pretty, not every offering is clean, but everything that returns to the soil grows, even you. You're not sure when you fell asleep. It might have been during the soft chant of frogs, or when the copal smoke began curling into your dreams like a lullaby made of mist. Either way, you awaken to a cool hand on your shoulder. The gardener nods toward the canoe. It's smaller than the others, narrow, low to the water, and painted the color of stillness. You climb in. The water is glass now. The lake so smooth it feels like you're gliding through the sky instead of across the surface. The stars shimmer below you. Your own reflection, tired and wide-eyed, follows beside the boat like a ghost who's just here for the ride. He doesn't speak. Neither do you. Because tonight, words would only get in the way. You've entered the realm of night lettuce. Yes, that's what he calls it. Lettuce that grows not under the sun but under the moon. Pulled from the chinampa beds not at dawn or dusk, but sometime between dreams, during that soft, unclaimed space where midnight lingers but morning hasn't begun. You reach a floating plot that looks different from the others. Everything here is low. Smaller plants, tight rows, soft ridges of soil barely taller than your wrist. The air is cooler. The wind smells faintly of mint, mud, and whatever the moon does when no one's watching. The gardener steps onto the mat of the chinampa without a splash. You follow, slower, heavier. The lettuce doesn't seem to mind. It shivers slightly in the breeze, its pale leaves almost glowing. You crouch beside it. The dirt is cold, not dead, just drowsy, like it's been waiting for someone to arrive quietly and ask permission. You do. The gardener shows you how to harvest in silence. No pulling, no cutting, just gently twisting the roots until they release. Not every plant does. Some are stubborn, some are not ready. Some need more dreams, and that's fine, because night harvesting isn't about volume, it's about respect. Aztec farmers believed some crops were shy. They bloomed under starlight, fed better on moon water, and were most potent when gathered in silence. Lettuce was one, certain herbs, some edible flowers, and occasionally beans that had been planted during a lunar eclipse. These were called molotl crops, quiet growths. Not secret, just private. You begin filling a shallow basket with the loosened plants. Each one rests like a sleeping infant, roots intact, leaves curled inward, still holding a bit of night in their veins. You ask the gardener why. Why bother harvesting in the dark? He doesn't answer at first. Then simply, because not everything that grows wants to be seen. You sit with that for a while. He tells you some chinampa keepers used to assign songs to their night harvests, but sung only in the mind. To break the quiet was to risk waking something that wasn't ready to be disturbed. Even the duck stayed away, though one once tried to join and was politely escorted back to its coop after honking at the moon 3 times. You keep working. The basket fills slowly. The moon dips lower. Somewhere far across the lake, a drum beats once, soft and deep, like a heartbeat echoing through the water. You finish your row. The gardener nods again. Enough. You return to the canoe. You don't speak, neither does he, and the lake carries you home. Tomorrow, you'll learn how corn sometimes argues with its caretakers, and why some farmers swore their stalks refuse to grow unless given a particular type of mulch. But tonight, you lay the basket of night lettuce beside you. You close your eyes, and as the canoe drifts, your breath matches the water. In, out, soft, still, because some things grow quietly and some things only bloom when you let the dark have its turn. The canoe bumps gently against the chinampa's edge, like a polite knock on a dream. You open your eyes slowly, unsure if you ever really slept, or if you've just been floating through layers of stillness disguised as time. The stars are thinning now. Dawn is somewhere just beyond the edge of the lake, painting soft outlines in the mist. The gardener stretches without standing, his joints cracking like twigs preparing to be part of something rooted. And then he points to a tall, lean plant standing a little straighter than the rest. Corn, or as the Aztecs would say, Tlaxcali's mother. Because this isn't just a crop, it's a personality. You step closer and notice the way the stalks seem to lean, not with the wind, but against it. Purposefully, suspiciously, like they've heard something about you and are waiting to see if it's true. The gardener chuckles. They're dramatic, and you believe him. This brings us into a lesser-known chapter of Aztec agricultural lore. Corn has opinions. That's not just poetic, that's practical. Because unlike the gentle beans or the moody tomatoes, maize was believed to be prideful, regal, high maintenance. It didn't just need food and sun, it needed the right treatment, the correct attitude, and most importantly, it needed to be fed properly. You walk through a narrow row of stalks. Their tassels are gold-threaded and whispery. Their leaves are sharp-edged and dusted with ash. And at their feet, you find the secret. Fish bones, tiny ones, mixed with dried lakeweed, chili pulp, and the husks of red amaranth flowers, carefully arranged in small mounds between each plant like little altars. You glance at the gardener. They like elegance, he says, shrugging. Feed them trash, they grow angry. Some chinampa farmers even claim that corn refused to grow if it was given the same fertilizer mix as beans or squash, that it would sulk, shrivel, drop its ears prematurely, as if to say, I deserve better than this. Others swore they heard stalks crackle with disapproval during composting ceremonies, especially if the wrong ash was used or the fish hadn't been properly fermented. Of course, the modern mind says, that's ridiculous. And yet, here you are, standing in a patch of maize that seems to hum with presence. The stalks sway, but not with the breeze, with judgment. You feel it. And you reach down, scoop a little of the compost mix, and offer it gently to the soil like an apology. It accepts, reluctantly. The gardener explains the recipe. Ground fish bone, ash from ceremonial incense, crushed marigold petals, a pinch of salt collected from the lake's edge during the dry season, and, when available, a scrap of noble maize bread from a high feast. It remembers, he says. The corn knows when it's been honored. Some farmers even whispered compliments to them before harvesting. Not for superstition, but out of respect, or maybe fear. There's an old saying scratched into a chinampa paddle found centuries later. The squash will forgive you. The bean will miss you. The corn will never forget. You believe it. You move carefully through the rows now, listening. Not with your ears, but with something softer. And when the wind shifts, you swear it sounds like sass. Tomorrow, you'll learn how Aztec farmers believed some beans could hear, and why a few were planted only after a proper song was sung. But tonight, You rest your hand against a proud stalk. Its tassel brushes your shoulder, and you think some crops want nutrients, others want attention. But the corn? The corn wants to be known. And here, in the floating farms of the lake, it is. The sun is just beginning to show off. Not fully risen, just stretching, yawning, spilling a little golden light across the water like it's trying to apologize for being late. You squint against the brightness, rubbing your eyes with hands still dusted in soil, ash, and an uncomfortable amount of yesterday's fermented fish fertilizer. The gardener is already ahead of you, standing in a bean field that feels more like a whisper than a crop. The vines twist delicately, climbing bamboo poles with a kind of elegance you didn't expect from beans. Their leaves rustle gently, even without wind, and the pods sway like they're sharing secrets. They hear you, he says. You pause. You look at him. He's not smiling. He's absolutely serious. Welcome to one of the most peculiar, soft-spoken, oddly believable beliefs in chinampa agriculture. Shh. The beans are listening. Aztec farmers, especially older ones, the kind who spoke more to plants than people, believed that certain beans responded to sound, not just water or moonlight or compost ratios, but tone, rhythm, and volume. So yes, they talked to their beans, sometimes in words, sometimes in hums, sometimes just in presence. Not all beans were treated this way, of course, only the ones known as aokal, long-podded, firm-skinned, notoriously stubborn. But when treated kindly, they gave and gave and gave. The gardener crouches beside a row and begins humming. It's a low melody, almost not a melody at all, more like a breath repeated with purpose, a vibration more than a tune. You swear the bean leaves respond. One even curls slightly in his direction like it's leaning in. They like repetition, he says. You nod because at this point you've watched fish become compost, ducks become priests, and ash become prayer. Beans responding to lullabies? Sure, why not? You kneel beside your own row and try it. Not a song, just a hello. A soft, simple, unsure hey. And you wait. Nothing dramatic happens. No magic vines or sudden growth spurts. But you feel something shift, not in the beans, but in you. Because the act of greeting a plant, it slows you down. Forces you to breathe softer, speak gentler. Listen. The gardener tells you some families had bean songs passed down through generations. Nonsense lyrics that made no sense but had the right cadence, the right intention. A few even believed that beans grown with the wrong attitude became bitter or refused to soften when boiled. There were rules. Never shout near the beans, never harvest them during an argument, and above all, never lie in their presence. Apparently, beans hate liars. You ask if that's superstition, he shrugs. Why test it? You laugh. The beans don't. You stop. You continue through the rows, brushing your fingers along the vines, whispering greetings, apologies, promises. Not because you think it changes the bean, but because it changes you. Tomorrow you'll see what happens when the ducks escape, and what kind of chaos ensues when sacred compost machines start eating the corn like it owes them money. But tonight, you sit in the soft hush of the vine rows. You hum a little, even if off-key, and you imagine the beans, in their quiet way, humming back. Because maybe the real magic isn't whether they hear you, maybe it's simply this, that you chose to speak. You hear them before you see them. Slapping feet, urgent flapping, a distant splash followed by an unmistakable quack that can only be translated as freedom. You turn. The gardener is already running. Well, running in the way someone with decades of soil wisdom and zero cardio aspirations does. Determined, slightly hunched, sandals flapping like panicked tortillas. And up ahead, the ducks. All of them. Out of their coop, out of their lane. In the corn. Welcome to the most chaotic corner of Chinampa life. A garden under siege by ducks. First glance, it's almost beautiful. Feathers against maize stalks, webbed feet gently massaging the soil, wings flaring in the sunrise like fans at a royal ritual. But then, one duck launches itself at a squash blossom. Another knocks over a compost basket like it's settling an old score. Two more are aggressively waddling in synchronized rebellion toward the ceremonial chili plot. That one's eating the noble compost, the gardener yells. And that's when you realize, this isn't just an accident. This is an uprising. The ducks, those soft-footed, sacred, compost-generating marvels, have had enough. Of order, of fences, of the quiet, poop-centric life they've lived. Today, they forage. Today, they feast. And nothing, not even reverence, will stop them. You leap into action, chasing after one particularly dramatic duck who has a marigold petal in its beak and no regrets in its eyes. It flaps, you flail, and together you both fall into a shallow channel of water that smells distinctly like fermented lily root. The gardener is already herding 3 others back with a broom and a string of half-sung bean lullabies. They hate the song, he pants. That's why it works. It takes time, patience, soft threats, a bribe involving stale corn cakes and one leftover tomato. But eventually, order is restored. The ducks are back in their coop, preening as if nothing happened. One even glares at you, as if to say, "You will not win tomorrow." The gardener collapses onto a pile of dried reeds, laughing. "Happens once a season," he says. "We call it the Day of the Feathered Gluttons." You ask if they ever punish the ducks. He shakes his head. No, they're part of the story. Even chaos feeds the soil. And he means it. Because as you walk through the damaged corn rows, you notice something strange. The soil is softer. The compost baskets, though tipped, have mixed more thoroughly. The trampled squash, already releasing scent that attracts pollinators. Even the mess is useful, and maybe that's the secret of the chinampa. Nothing is wasted. Not the fish, not the ash, not even a duck-led mutiny at dawn. Tomorrow, you'll see how Aztec gardeners use chili peppers not just for spice, but as a line of defense, a natural fence that bit back. But tonight, you sit in the wreckage. You pat a feather from your sleeve, and you whisper to the ground, "Thanks for being patient." Because even when things go wrong, even when the ducks escape, something still grows. And the garden always forgives. The sun is fully awake now. It stretches across the chinampa like melted gold, warming the damp soil and casting long shadows from the bean poles and corn stalks, some of which are still recovering from the duck apocalypse of earlier. Feathers drift lazily in the breeze. You step lightly, careful not to spook anything that still believes it's in charge around here. The gardener meets you at the far end of the chinampa beside a row of plants that look like they're plotting something, low to the ground, sharp-leaved, bright little peppers shining like warnings. These, he says with a satisfied sigh, are the guards. Welcome to a lesser-known but highly respected tradition in chinampa defense, chili pepper strategies. You crouch beside the first row. The soil here is particularly dark, rich with compost and duck fertilizer, sure, but also strangely clean. No weeds, no bite marks, no tracks. You glance over the low pepper plants, noting their small size but commanding presence. These are chiltepins, the fiery ancestors of modern peppers, tiny, wild, and absolutely not to be messed with. The gardener explains, Aztec farmers didn't just grow chilies for food or ritual. They used them as natural barriers, living fences, aromatic alarm systems, the kind of line you didn't cross unless you had a very good reason or very thick sandals. Ducks hated them. Mice avoided them. Uninvited guests coughed a lot. Some plots of corn or squash were completely encircled by chili rows. Others were interplanted, one row of maize, one of chili, a strategy known as schlapopo chili or fire row farming. You ask if it really worked. The gardener grins and points to the plot behind him. No ducks made it past this row in 5 seasons. You're impressed. You ask how they were planted. Turns out there was a process. Seeds were fermented in lake water for 3 nights, then mixed with crushed lime, fish bone powder, and a splash of duck yolk. Yes, the ducks still contribute, even when they're sleeping off crimes. Then the seedlings were whispered to, not with love, but with respect, because these were not gentle plants. They didn't need lullabies, they needed purpose. Grow sharp, grow bright, bite the one who bites first. That was one of the planting chants. Short, fierce, effective. The gardener lets you pick one of the tiny peppers. It's barely the size of your thumbnail, but your fingers start tingling almost immediately. You consider eating it. He shakes his head slowly. Only if you want to see through time. You put it back. Some farmers even dried these peppers and scattered the flakes around the base of their most fragile seedlings, not to fertilize, but to warn. There were stories of a chinampa thief who once stepped barefoot into a chili ring and limped home howling, vowing never again to mess with angry produce. Others used them as messages. A string of dried chilies hung near the edge of a plot meant this soil is spoken for. 3 in a bundle, come back in winter. 5. Step here and meet the spirits. You finish walking the fire row and glance back at the safe, soft crops it protects. Squash, tomatoes, lettuce still fresh from the moonlight. None of them could defend themselves. But the chilies, they did the fighting. Tomorrow, you'll explore a weirder form of defense. Floating Scarecrow Guild, full of masks, feathers, and bird-shaped hats meant to confuse crows and entertain gods. But tonight, you kneel by the row of guardians, you bow your head just a little, and you whisper, "Thank you for holding the line." Because every garden needs a warrior. Even if it's only 6 inches tall, even if it bites you back. You wake to rustling. Not the rustling of leaves in wind or the flustered flapping of ducks planning their next great escape. No. This is stranger, rhythmic, slightly theatrical, like someone trying very hard to make noise without making a sound. You peer across the chinampa and freeze. Standing among the corn, facing away from you, arms stretched at awkward angles and head tilted just a little too far, is a scarecrow. Except it's moving. Just slightly. You rub your eyes. The gardener appears beside you, munching on a roasted squash seed, as if this scene is entirely normal. "Don't worry," he says. "That one's just showing off." You blink. "It's alive?" "No," he shrugs, "just well-dressed." Welcome to the most whimsical, surprisingly spiritual, and absolutely stylish tradition in Aztec agriculture, the Floating Scarecrow Society. Yes, a society. Not an official one, of course. No scrolls, no laws, no annual banquet that we know of, but a long-respected, informal guild of chinampa farmers who specialized in creating scarecrows so elaborate, they weren't just for frightening birds. They were for honoring the fields. The scarecrow before you is draped in old ceremonial cloth, stitched with faded feathers and bells that chime in the breeze. Its face is painted, not with menace, but with kindness. Big eyes, a soft smile, a guardian more than a threat. You step closer and notice a necklace of dried beans, a pouch tied at its hip, likely filled with duck feathers, a small clay whistle tucked in its hand. This isn't decoration, it's ritual. The gardener explains that each chinampa had at least one scarecrow, but those made by scarecrow artisans, yes, real people with as their life's work, were special. They weren't just about scaring crows, they were about welcoming gods. In particular, a deity named Xochipilli, god of flowers, song, and mischief, was believed to favor beautiful scarecrows. If he liked one, he might bless the field with better blooms, brighter peppers, and fewer feathered thieves. You walk farther down the plot and spot 2 more. One shaped like a crane, wearing a mask painted with maize silk and dotted with chili seeds. Another shaped like a turtle, a big round shell made from bundled reeds, its head a hollow gourd carved into a gentle smile. These aren't just to frighten, they're to delight. The birds? They don't know what to do. Some fly close, only to back off in confusion. Others perch nearby, eyeing the scarecrows with deep suspicion. A few apparently become fans, returning regularly as if attending a weird puppet show staged by the vegetables. There were rules, of course. Never reuse a scarecrow's outfit without asking permission. You had to nod and leave a bean. Never place a scarecrow with its back to the sun. Rude. Never, under any circumstance, give a scarecrow 2 heads. The crows find it funny and that defeats the purpose. You try your hand at making one. With the gardener's help, you weave a frame from flexible reeds, drape it in old maize husks, and place a little hat on top, shaped like a flower. Because why not? You name it. You won't say the name out loud. That's between you and the beans. But the moment you finish, the breeze picks up, the figure sways, and one nearby duck honks in what sounds suspiciously like approval. Tomorrow, you'll learn about moonlight farming, where entire gardens are fed and harvested at night, and why some lettuce refuses to grow unless sung to in the dark. But tonight, you sit beneath your scarecrow's long shadow. You hum a few notes. And you feel the crows watching but keeping their distance, because here even the shadows wear smiles, and even the silence wears feathers, and even the soil knows. This garden is protected. Night comes again, not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly enough that you notice the way the blue deepens in the water, the way the ducks quiet down without being told, the way the corn stops fussing and the beans lean toward each other like sleepy old friends. The stars return, of course. They always do. But tonight, the gardener hands you something different. A small, round, clay lantern. Inside, a tiny coal glows, pulsing like a sleepy heartbeat. He nods toward the canoe. No words, just an invitation. You climb in. This is no ordinary patrol. This is moonlight farming, the quiet, eerie, oddly sacred practice of tending to the chinampas when the world is half asleep and fully honest. Welcome to Aztec moonlight farming. The canoe glides almost without sound, just a soft scrape against the lily roots, a whisper of water against the reed sides. Above you, the moon is a perfect slice of pearl. Below, it reflects back like the eye of something ancient and very calm. You arrive at a smaller, narrower chinampa. No tall crops here, only lettuce, herbs, and tiny flowering plants, whose names the gardener refuses to translate. Not because they're secret, but because, in his words, they only mean what they mean in the dark. The soil is already damp. You kneel, place the lantern nearby, and begin. Not harvesting, not feeding. Listening. The gardener demonstrates first. He runs his fingers across the tops of the lettuce leaves, not tugging, just brushing as if asking, "Are you ready?" Only when a leaf curls slightly, just slightly, does he pluck it. "If you ask," he whispers, "they'll answer." You try it. Your first lettuce leaf doesn't move. The second, also no, but the third, tiny tucked in, half hidden under its older siblings, shivers. You pluck it. It doesn't fight. Because in moonlight farming, plants are not pulled. They are offered. The gardener tells you the story of Yohualixochitl, the flower of the night. A rare bloom said to only appear on chinampas left entirely untouched by sunlight, its seeds planted during eclipses, its petals used in love potions and lullabies. No one's seen it in generations, but some swear its scent lingers in the soil. You smell the air now. Faint mint, faint lime, faint memory. Everything is gentler here. You ladle water from the lake into a gourd and pour it carefully along the rows. The water glows faintly in the lantern light, and the lettuce seems to lean into it. The soil doesn't hiss or slurp. It sighs. Somewhere nearby, you hear a heron cry. Not urgently, just stating its location. The ducks stay asleep, even they understand this is not their time. This garden, this chinampa, was designed to be fed by quiet. The gardener tells you that moon-farmed crops were often reserved for special ceremonies. Food for new mothers, for people in mourning, for elderly dancers after long nights of festival, because these crops carried stillness. A softness that couldn't be grown in the heat and clatter of day. They grow slow, he says, but they never forget you. You ask if it's superstition. He nods. Of course, but good superstition is just science that hasn't learned to sing yet. You laugh. The lettuce doesn't. You harvest a few more leaves. The soil thanks you in its own way by staying warm, by staying soft, by not pushing back. And when your basket is half full, the gardener stands. Enough. You nod. Because here, enough doesn't mean full. It means balanced. Tomorrow, you'll be back in the sun, learning about how farmers rotated lake mud between chinampas like loans, with interest, schedules, and the occasional passive-aggressive note made of fish scales. But tonight, you drift home in the canoe, your lantern flickers, and you whisper to the basket of moon lettuce, "Thank you." Because not all things grow by light. Some things grow in silence. And some things only bloom when nobody is looking. Dawn again. But not the dramatic kind. No crimson sky, no golden fanfare. Just soft light unfolding over the chinampa like a blanket being pulled gently over sleeping shoulders. The lake is quiet. Even the ducks, possibly still feeling guilty about their recent crimes, move in slow silence. You find the gardener near the southern edge of the floating fields, kneeling beside a canoe half filled with what looks like mud, which is probably obvious. But this isn't just any mud, it's borrowed. He looks up and gives a small smile. "We're on the repayment schedule today." You blink. "Repayment? Mud you take. Must be mud you return." Ah. You've stumbled into the next layer of Aztec agricultural sophistication. Borrowed soil, borrowed time. Because chinampas weren't static things. They weren't built once and left alone. They were alive, breathing, shifting, sinking, constantly requiring maintenance. And part of that maintenance involved borrowing mud from the lake bed or from neighboring fields. And when you borrow, you give it back. Here's how it worked. Each season, some chinampas would grow tired, drained of nutrients, waterlogged, or compacted from overuse. Instead of letting them sit idle, farmers would loan lake mud to each other. This wasn't casual. It was recorded. Not in ledgers, but in knots, markers, or carved seed pods hanging from reed poles. You walk with the gardener as he guides the canoe to the neighboring chinampa. The one he's borrowing from today has already been marked. A long pole with a white feather and 2 small maize husks tied to the top. That means, okay to borrow, return by mid-season. Soil etiquette, it's a thing. You help scoop the rich lakebed muck into wide baskets, thick with organic matter, a mix of decomposed water plants, old fish, and whatever dreams the lake has decided to shed today. Then you paddle back, and gently, deliberately, you spread it across your chinampa's tired sections. You're feeding it, but also rebuilding it. The gardener explains that some chinampas are generous, constantly giving. Others are more stubborn, needing extra mud, more frequent breaks. It's not just about fertility, it's about personality. And the mud? Oh, it remembers. Each layer has a history, where it came from, what it was fed, whether it carried night lettuce or noble compost. Some farmers claim they can feel the difference underfoot. Rich mud walks back slower. This one's from Xochimilco, the gardener says, patting the dark mixture. Good for root vegetables, bad for moody beans. You ask what happens if someone doesn't return the mud. He raises an eyebrow. Then the garden complains, but also the neighbors complain. Borrowing without returning breaks the trust between people and between chinampas. And in a community that lives literally on floating dirt, trust is everything. Some chinampas even refuse to grow after stolen mud was used. Not immediately, but slowly. A kind of agricultural grudge, a leafy cold shoulder. There are stories of a farmer who borrowed too much too quickly. His crops looked good at first, big maize, fast-growing beans, but within a season, the roots turned bitter. The soil hardened. Even the scarecrow fell over and refused to stand up straight. Soil karma. You finish the last basket, your hands heavy with the weight of borrowed earth. The canoe drifts lazily back into place, no urgency. The chinampa beneath your feet seems to breathe deeper. You've paid your debt, and the garden knows. Tomorrow, you'll listen in on a gossip session between chinampa farmers, a casual exchange of dreams, compost recipes, and probably a little light slander about someone's underperforming tomatoes. But tonight, you press your palm into the newly borrowed soil. You feel it settle under your touch. You whisper, "Thank you for trusting me." Because here, even mud is a relationship. Even dirt is a dialogue. And even the ground beneath your feet has a memory. Ah. The sun is higher now, but it's the kind of warmth that comforts rather than commands. No urgency, no pressure, just a gentle reminder that time is passing and the squash won't gossip about themselves. You follow the gardener down a narrow reed path to a cluster of chinampas tucked farther from the main channels. Quieter, more private. The breeze shifts and you catch the smell of roasting maize, damp soil, and something faintly herbal. Like wet basil with a secret, the sound of laughter reaches you before the people do. Not loud laughter, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that bubbles, soft, easy, like steam escaping from a clay pot. You round the corner and see them. 3 gardeners, 2 elders, 1 child, and a dog that clearly outranks all of them. They sit in a loose circle, baskets at their feet, filled with beans, flowers, and what looks like the world's smallest eggplant. Nearby, a pot simmers over a low fire, sending up lazy curls of smoke. A paddle rests beside it, painted with swirling blue glyphs, and a single word scratched in, Tentlatoli, the speech between land. You've entered one of the most charming rituals in the floating farm world. Floating garden gossip. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like, but it's more than idle chatter. These farmers aren't just passing time. They're exchanging knowledge, compost tips, seasonal omens, and the occasional thinly veiled insult about someone's wilted amaranth. You sit cross-legged beside them. The gardener joins the circle with a familiar nod, then hands you a small gourd filled with bean broth. It's hot, slightly smoky, probably contains something you're better off not asking about. One of the elders, face like sun-baked riverstone, eyes sharp as obsidian, leans forward and says, "So, how's your chili this season?" You realize he's not talking to you. He's talking to your compost. This is how it works. Each farmer represents not just themselves, but their chinampa, their soil, their plants, their choices. And everyone else? They remember. "He overfed his tomatoes with duck compost last year," one whispers behind a hand. Had red vines, like anger. Her beans listened too well, another says. They grew bitter. Heard the wrong song. You try not to laugh, because while it's funny, it's also deeply serious. These stories aren't jokes, they're coded data. Observations passed through memory, dressed in metaphor. One woman pulls a small pouch from her belt. Inside, crushed marigold petals and sweet potato ash. She hands you a pinch. Try this on your moon lettuce next time, she says. Might help it sleep longer. You nod solemnly like you fully understand what that means. Someone else offers a folded reed note. Inside, a recipe for night compost. Sha, equal parts frog skin slurry, ground lake salt and water collected during a rainstorm. Only if you're not mad at anyone. You jot it down. The dog sneezes once and is fed a squash chip. Status confirmed. The conversation shifts. Now it's about a young farmer who planted beans during a blood moon and swears they grew in the shape of his grandmother's name. Then someone asks about the scarecrows in the southern plots. Apparently one has begun leaning suggestively, and no one knows if it's wind or romance. Some plants flirt, someone mutters. The circle chuckles. You look around and realize this isn't just community, it's a living archive. No books, no apps, no spreadsheets. Just people, soil, stories, and trust. Tomorrow, you'll visit a chinampa where composted dreams are filed like reports, sorted by symbols, marked with colors, and occasionally cited during planting arguments. But tonight, you sip the last of your bean broth. You lean back, you listen, because every floating farm has its secrets, and the only way to learn them is to sit still long enough for the gossip to bloom. Later that night, after the laughter fades and the fire dies to glowing embers, the gardener leads you to a quiet chinampa, far from the others. The canoe ride is slow, the lake still. Even the frogs seem to be whispering. You arrive at a small rectangular garden bordered by water lilies and soft lanterns made from hollowed-out gourds. The air feels different here, thicker, almost like it's holding its breath. You step off the boat. The ground is soft, but not muddy. It's been combed, raked in smooth lines like a Zen garden made of loam. At the center stands a reed hut, no taller than your shoulder, with walls painted in faded reds and blues. The gardener opens it gently. Inside, stacked like scrolls in a library, are wooden slats, each carved, marked, or tied with feathers and bits of bone. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, all stored with incredible care. Welcome, he says quietly, to the Dream Archive. You blink. You file dreams? He nods. Because here on this chinampa, gardeners don't just compost food scraps or fish bones, they compost dreams. Let's explain. In Aztec tradition, dreams weren't random. They were messages from gods, from ancestors, from the soil itself. And certain chinampa caretakers believed that the best compost came not just from physical offerings, but from psychic ones too. If you dreamt of a flooded garden, a snake in the maze, a duck made of feathers and teeth, you recorded it and you fed it to the earth, literally. You're handed a blank slat, thin, smooth, slightly curved. The gardener gives you a small bone-tipped tool. Write what you remember, he says. You hesitate, but then you scratch it out. Last night's dream, something about lettuce leaves fluttering like birds, a scarecrow playing a flute, a duck glaring at you with the full authority of a feathered deity. He reads it, nods, then hands you a pinch of fine black compost from a gourd marked with a red dot. Dream of movement, he says, best for shallow roots. You press the compost into the soil beneath a tiny herb plant, then slide your carved slat into the wall of the hut, next to hundreds of others. Each one represents a moment of trust between mind and soil. Some are tied with green good dreams, others with black warnings. One has a little gold bead at the corner, a prophetic duck, the gardener explains, as if that makes everything clearer. This is how the archive works. Dreams are shared, dreams are interpreted, and some are believed to influence the soil. If 3 farmers dream of fish turning to dust, add more lake silt. If a dream features loud beans, watch your compost ratios. If a child dreams of a silent garden, wait before planting anything new. There's no science behind it, but there is pattern. And in a world built on floating dirt and whispered rituals, pattern is truth. You ask if people make up dreams to influence planting. He sometimes, but the soil can tell the difference. You believe him. Tomorrow, you'll learn how Aztec gardeners tracked which dreams led to the best harvests. using painted maize kernels and clay tokens buried at the base of each plant. But tonight, you sit by the archive. You feel the soil beneath your palm. You remember your dream and how strange it felt, but also how right. Because maybe dreams are just compost in another form, and maybe every garden grows best when the mind is part of the soil. Morning again. This time it arrives without ceremony, just the slow unfolding of light across water, the quiet rustle of bean vines stretching themselves awake, and a single duck honking once, as if to confirm the world hasn't ended. You follow the gardener to a small circular platform surrounded by rows of maize and nightshade. In the center is a flat slab of dark stone. It's cool to the touch and covered in symbols, maize kernels painted in red, yellow, and black, arranged in patterns that look random at first, but aren't. It's time for the reviews, Gardner says. You stare. Reviews of the dreams, he nods, and the harvest. Welcome to one of the most delightfully confusing aspects of Chinampa life, dream harvest ratings. Here's how it works. Remember the dream archive, all those little carved slats stored in the reed hut? Well, those dreams weren't just stored, they were tested. Each time a crop was harvested, lettuce, squash, chilies, even ceremonial marigolds, its yield, taste, and behavior were quietly compared against the dreams filed before planting. If a dream seemed to correlate with success, it earned a kernel. Yes, a literal maize kernel, painted and marked with symbols. Then placed on this very stone in a circle of dream interpretation that's equal parts memory, metaphor, and mild competition. You sit beside the stone now. The gardener picks up a red kernel. This one's from a dream where the lake turned to honey. That same season, the tomatoes were sweet enough to be eaten raw with just lake salt. He places the kernel in the approved row. Then he picks up a black one. This one's from a dream about crows dancing in the duck coop. That same season, all the beans went bitter and 2 scarecrows fell over. He places it gently into the maybe not pile. This system may sound absurd, and yet it's meticulous. Each kernel is like a bookmark, a reminder of intuition tested by reality. Dreams weren't blindly trusted. They were tracked, compared, remembered. It's agricultural folklore with data. And sometimes, when enough red kernels gathered around a particular kind of dream, say fish turning into candles or chilies glowing in the dark, that dream would become a planting omen, a signal. Farmers would tell their neighbors. If you dream of floating roots this year, plant squash before the 3rd rain, and people would listen, because the land listened back. You ask if anyone ever faked a dream to earn more kernels. The gardener snorts. Of course, but the soil knows, always. He hands you a small yellow kernel with a single black stripe. Your moon lettuce? Sweet, crisp, even-tempered. The dream of the scarecrow with a flute? It earned this. You smile, because somehow, in this floating world of ducks, compost, ghosts, and corn with attitude, your dream made the menu. You place the kernel gently onto the stone beside others, a mosaic of memory and maize. Tomorrow, you'll visit a chinampa where each plant is given a name, and some are rumored to whisper it back when harvested at just the right hour. But tonight, you sit beside the circle of kernels. You run your fingers through the patterns, and you whisper, not to the soil, but to the dream itself. Thank you for growing with me, because sometimes all you need for a good harvest is a handful of hope, a splash of lake mud, and a dream that remembers how to bloom. The afternoon light is thick now, golden and lazy, stretching across the chinampa like a cat that's too comfortable to move. You trail behind the gardener along a crooked path, stepping over bundles of reeds and duck tracks that look suspiciously choreographed. He leads you to a section of garden that's different. Not larger, not fancier, but personal. Every plant here is marked, not with the usual feathers or color-coded tags, but with names. Small clay tokens hang from stalks and vines, each etched with symbols, syllables, or simple drawings. One tomato plant has a charm that reads Esli, which the gardener tells you means little blood. A bean sprout is marked Nene, which might mean baby or noisy, depending on how the wind is blowing. You've entered one of the quietest, strangest, most lovingly obsessive corners of Chinampa culture, naming the plants. The gardener smiles as he gestures around. They grow better when they feel known. You don't argue, because here that idea isn't quaint, it's tradition. Certain farmers believe that plants, especially those raised for ritual use or healing, benefited from being personally identified, not just categorized by species or purpose, but given identity, and not randomly. Names were chosen based on the first dream had while planting, the first bird sound heard near the seed, or, in some cases, the mood of the soil that morning. You kneel beside a maize stalk with the name Tlali, meaning earth. Its tassels shimmer in the breeze, and you can't help but feel it standing taller than the unnamed rows elsewhere. The gardener pulls out a small pouch. Inside are thin pieces of bark, each one smoothed and curled like a scroll. Names are carved into them, ready to be assigned. You take one. He watches. You look around and settle on a particularly stubborn squash vine that's been leaning awkwardly into its neighbor's space all week. You press your thumb into the bark. Then, using a small bone stylus, you scratch in a name. Topiltzin. Not because it means anything to you yet, but because it feels right. It rolls off your mind like a promise. You tie the tag to the vine with a strip of softened lake grass. The squash doesn't respond, but the breeze does. Now it knows it's loved, the gardener says. Some scoff at this tradition, some call it superstitious, but others have stories. Stories of corn that only thrived after being named for a lost child. Of chili plants that refused to grow until called something with teeth. Of lettuce that wilted every morning until someone whispered, "Good morning, sweet one," just once. There are even records, in murals, in poetry, in folded reed books, of entire naming ceremonies held for gardens about to be planted for temple offerings. Priests walked through the rows, humming, naming each seed aloud. You ask the gardener if he ever reuses names. He shakes his head. A name stays with the roots, even after the plant is gone. Tomorrow, you'll join him for one of the oldest chinampa practices still remembered, a harvest festival for the compost pile itself, where the garden is thanked, fed, and sung to as if it were a guest of honor. But tonight, you walk once more among the named plants. You whisper a few of their names as you pass, and when the wind answers, you believe it's them. Because every squash deserves a name, every bean deserves a greeting, and every garden, no matter how small, deserves to be known. You wake to music, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. A rhythm built from reed flutes, gourd drums, and something that might be rattles made from dried bean pods. You sit up slowly. The chinampa feels festive. The gardener is already dressed in his nice tunic, same earth tones, but with extra embroidery in the shape of corn spirals and duck feathers. He hands you a bundle wrapped in maize husk and a smile that says, "Today is not just another compost day. Today is special. Today is Tlamachi Listli, the day of gratitude to the compost." Yes, you heard that right. You've entered one of the most beautifully absurd, utterly sincere, and entirely justified rituals in the life of a chinampa. The compost festival. You follow a small procession down the reed path, farmers, children, ducks, of course, each carrying something, a gourd, a flower, a clay scoop, a plate of tamales. One person even brings a carved flute shaped like a fish. It sounds like sadness and pond water. At the edge of the chinampa, near a shaded mound surrounded by wild marigolds, lies the compost altar. It's not an altar in the religious sense. There are no statues, no candles, just a rich, steaming, ever-turning pile of life becoming life again. Covered in flower petals, feathers, ash, bits of fruit rind, broken reed tools, and memories. A small child places a doll-sized clay pot on top. An elder pours water from a moon-harvested gourd. You offer your maize husk bundle, inside a piece of night lettuce and the bark tag of the squash you named Topiltzin. The gardener bows. We feed the thing that feeds us. And suddenly, it all makes sense. Because in this world of floating gardens where fish become nutrients, where dreams are filed like weather reports, where ducks break rules and beans require lullabies, the compost pile is the heart. It receives everything, the good, the spoiled, the bitter, the sweet, the mistakes, and the leftovers, and it says, I can use that. Today, the compost is celebrated. You gather around the pile as someone begins a chant, slow, repetitive, oddly hypnotic. The words aren't translated for you, but you feel them in your spine. May what has ended become what begins. The group sings it again and again. A duck tries to join. It's not totally off-key. After the song, the gardener leads a quiet ceremony of feeding the compost. Each person adds something: wilted herbs, cracked seed shells, soil soaked with root wash, even a paper-thin fish bone wrapped in corn silk. Not thrown, placed. With intention, with gratitude. You ask if this is for the gods. The gardener shakes his head. It's for the garden. And maybe for us too. Because in this act of honoring decay, of thanking the rot, of singing to a pile of what no longer is, you feel something shift. You realize that compost isn't the end of the cycle, it's the beginning disguised as a grave. Tomorrow you'll learn how the Chinampa calendar was built around the planting moon, and how each compost offering its own date, chant, and lucky duck feather. But tonight, you sit by the warm pile. You hum the chant under your breath. You close your eyes, and you whisper, "Thank you for taking all that I couldn't carry." Because the pile doesn't judge, it doesn't reject, it just transforms. And in the center of the Chinampa, under the stars, beneath the roots, something ancient and gentle whispers back, "Give me everything, I will grow it for you." The festival is over now, but the warmth lingers. Not just from the compost pile, still gently steaming like a secret being slowly told, but from the people, the plants, even the soil under your feet, which feels somehow lighter. You wander the garden alone for a while, letting the hush of late afternoon settle around you like a well-worn cloak. The ducks are napping in a sunbeam. The scarecrows seem particularly proud of themselves today, standing at sharp angles like dancers who nailed the landing. And then you hear it. A bell. Not loud, not urgent, but unmistakable. It rings once, then again. You look to the gardener who has reappeared, as usual, like a magician who smells faintly of earth. "That," he says, "is the dream bell." You follow him toward a small grove at the edge of the Chinampa, where a narrow platform stretches out over the water. At the end of the platform, shaded by reeds and a crooked fig tree, is a tiny hut, more shrine than shelter. Inside is a logbook made of flattened bark, a basket of painted stones, and a bell hanging from a simple rope of braided agave fiber. The gardener gestures for you to sit. "Some people wake up and write their dreams," he says. "We file them. Welcome to the gentlest ritual you didn't know you needed. The dream log. Here's the tradition. When a gardener or anyone connected to the Chinampa has a dream they believe may matter, strange weather, talking maze, dancing ducks, prophetic scarecrows, etc., they come here at sunset, ring the bell, and place a stone in the log basket. Then they rest, literally. The act of dreaming again, deliberately within the Chinampa, with the intention of understanding, is part of the log. And if no dream comes, you come back tomorrow, because the bell isn't about announcement. It's about permission. Permission to rest, to listen, to let the garden speak when the mind gets quiet enough to hear it. The gardener hands you a stone, flat, black, cool to the touch, a single white dot painted at the center. "If you remember a dream," he says, "add another dot." You nod. He adds, "If you don't, the stone still remembers for you." You sit quietly now, watching the water reflect back the orange sky. A few dragonflies pass by like slow ideas with wings. Somewhere in the distance, a heron makes a sound like a door creaking open into another world. You ask if the dream log is ever full. He smiles. The basket changes, but the dreams keep coming. Some Chinampas even had dream keepers, people assigned to interpret and organize the dreams, marking them with feathers or scenting them with herbs depending on their tone. Basil for joy, copal for mystery, chili leaf for warning. And yes, some dream logs were wrong. They predicted droughts that never came, named pests that didn't exist, warned of tomato uprisings that never materialized. Still, they were kept, because dreams like compost don't have to be right. They just have to be received. Tomorrow, you'll learn how some Chinampa farmers believed certain dreams were contagious and what happened when an entire garden began behaving like a shared memory. But tonight, you lie back on the soft mat near the log hut. You hold the stone in your hand, you hear the bell ring once more, far away. And whether or not you dream tonight, you know the soil will. Because here in the floating world between root and star, even your sleep is planted with care. You wake slowly. No bell this time, no flute, no duck rebellion in the distance. Just breath, yours, the gardens, the lakes, all in rhythm, all in stillness. The gardener is already seated nearby, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees, gaze fixed on a row of lettuce that seems to be swaying even though there's no wind. You sit beside him. He doesn't speak at first, just watches, just listens. Then softly, something's shared. You blink, unsure if that's a question or an answer. He nods toward the chinampa, the plants, the water. Sometimes, a dream moves through more than one person. Ah, you've reached one of the most quietly unnerving and strangely beautiful phenomena whispered about in chinampa circles. Shared dreams, shared growth. Here's how it begins. One farmer dreams of floating roots. The next night, another dreams of beans without vines. By the end of the week, someone reports that their chili plants are growing sideways. Coincidence? Not here. Because in the world of chinampas, where soil carries memory and compost digests emotion, dreams aren't always private. Sometimes they travel. You're guided to a narrow chinampa that looks unremarkable at first glance, but as you approach, something feels off. Every plant is leaning in the same direction, not toward the sun, not against the wind, but toward a single point, the northern edge, near a bundle of reeds shaped vaguely like a sleeping body. This garden caught a dream, the gardener says. He explains. Last season, 5 farmers dreamed of a woman made of maize and mud. She walked through their fields, quiet but deliberate, touching each plant only once. No one spoke of it at first. But the harvests that year were strange. Tomatoes curved in spirals, corn turned pale gold before it ripened. The beans grew exactly 5 pods per vine. No more, no less. Eventually they talked, compared notes, realized the dream had passed between them, like a pollen cloud of thought. So they built her, the reed figure, not as a scarecrow, not as a shrine, but as a witness. And now the garden leans toward her, not because she's real, but because the dream became shared truth. You kneel beside a patch of amaranth, run your fingers through the soil. It's warm, buzzing almost, as if it remembers not just last night's weather, but the feeling of something more. Shared dreams create shared roots, the gardener says. Some chinampa farmers believe this is how wisdom survives, not just through words or compost recipes, but through feeling. A whisper passed down through soil, water, wind, sleep. There are even dream seasons when more than one chinampa falls into the same pattern, leaves twisting identically, roots tangling toward a shared direction, plants that bloom at night, together across distant plots. No one knows why it happens. But when it does, they don't fight it, they listen. Some farmers plant extra moon lettuce during shared dream years. Others avoid chili entirely, fearing the dream may grow spicy truths they aren't ready for. You ask if it's dangerous. The gardener tilts his head. Only if you lie to it. Tomorrow, you'll learn how chinampa caretakers end their seasons, not with a harvest, but with a burial of memory, planting symbols and leftovers to seed the next cycle. But tonight, you sit in the leaning garden, you breathe with it, and you think of your own dreams, the ones that felt too strange to share. Because maybe they weren't just yours. Maybe the garden knew them too. And maybe it's dreaming you back. By now, the chinampa knows you. You can feel it, in the way the soil gives under your feet, soft but steady. In the ducks who now greet you with respectful silence and only minor side-eye. In the way the scarecrows no longer seem quite as still. The gardener meets you at the farthest plot, a patch of earth framed by tall reeds and shaded by an arch made of flowering vines. It's quiet here. Even the water seems to hush as you arrive. He holds out a small bundle. Inside, a feather, a scrap of cloth, a few grains of dried maize, and a folded petal, still fragrant. Time to end the season, he says. You nod, though you're not sure what that means, until he kneels, clears a patch of soil, and begins to bury it. Welcome to the final rite of every true chinampa cycle, the burial of memory. Not a funeral, not exactly. This is a ritual of release, planting not for harvest, but for closure. A way to return what cannot be eaten, sold, or stored, but must still be remembered. The gardener explains, at the end of each growing season, every chinampa buries a memory bundle, a collection of scraps, symbols, and offerings that represent what the garden carried. A wilted leaf from the first planting, a broken tool handle, a compost scrap from a moon-fed harvest, a sliver of dream bark with unreadable lines, a feather from a duck that finally stopped stealing chili. Each item carries a weight, a story, a presence. And now, it returns, not to be forgotten, but to be transformed. You kneel beside him. He hands you your own bundle. You didn't know you'd made one, but somehow, here it is. A tomato seed you never planted, a name tag from your sassiest squash, a pebble from the dreamlog path. You place it into the ground, cover it with earth, press your palm against the soil. And for a moment, say nothing, because here, silence is prayer. Some Chinampa families mark these burial spots with a simple reed cross, others with a loop of twine or a single white pebble. Some left nothing at all. Because memory isn't always for display, it's for compost. Yes, even memories rot. The difficult ones, the proud ones, the strange and sacred ones. And in that rot, something prepares to bloom. Next season, the gardener says, you'll plant over this. You ask if it changes how things grow. He nods. Everything carries what came before, but not everything repeats it. You sit in stillness for a while. Just the sound of water, wind, ducks behaving themselves, for now. You think of all the names you gave, all the dreams you filed, all the soil you stirred, and you understand, this Chinampa didn't just grow plants, it grew you. Tomorrow you'll begin the walk back, slowly, stopping to say goodbye to beans that listened and scarecrows that may have winked when you weren't looking. But tonight, you leave your hand on the burial soil a little longer. You breathe. You let go. And the earth says, without words, without sound, thank you for feeding me what you could no longer carry. You walk the Chinampa like it's a dream you're not ready to wake from. The reeds part softly as you pass. The water ripples around your ankles as if to say, don't rush. Even the wind seems reluctant to move too fast, trailing behind you like a loyal thought. The gardener is quiet today, not silent, but softer. He walks beside you, not ahead. No more lessons, no more compost recipes, just presence. You arrive at the edge of the main canal. From here, you can see other Chinampas in the distance, floating gardens tended by other hands, other dreams, some bustling, some resting, some faded like old stories told only in yawns. The gardener stops and gestures toward one in particular. It's cracked at the edges, overgrown. The scarecrow has slouched into a permanent shrug. The soil is still there, still breathing, but neglected. That one, he says, used to sing. This is how you learn about what they call the quieting. The period when some Chinampas, beautiful, storied, full of memory, are slowly forgotten. Welcome to one of the most bittersweet chapters in this floating world, the fading of the old gardens. It doesn't happen all at once. At first, someone forgets a planting date. Then the compost pile isn't stirred. The ducks stop visiting. The scarecrow tilts too far and is never corrected. The beans hum but hear no reply. And the soil, it remembers, but it stops expecting. Some of these Chinampas are abandoned because the family moved or the water levels shifted or city roads came too close. Others simply tired. Because yes, a garden can grow weary, especially when no one listens anymore. But here's what the gardener tells you, kneeling by the edge. Even a quiet Chinampa dreams. He points to the reeds. Tiny green shoots peek through the tangled weeds. The old ones aren't dead, just resting, waiting for someone to remember their name. He tells you stories of Chinampas revived decades after silence, restored by grandchildren, curious apprentices, wandering poets with more time than skill. Gardens that responded to the smallest kindness, a scoop of lake mud, a single whispered greeting, a duck's accidental nap on sacred soil. They don't need much, he says, just to be seen. You wonder if a dream left too long begins to forget itself. But then a duck honks once. That's right at the edge of that forgotten Chinampa, and you watch a dragonfly circle above the fallen scarecrow like a tiny priest. Maybe memory never dies here. Maybe it just curls up like compost, warming itself beneath the roots, waiting. Tomorrow, you'll visit the last plot, the one where you first stepped foot before you knew what chilies guarded or how beans needed names. You'll lie on the same mat, listen to the same frogs, be offered the same silence. But tonight, you stare out at the garden that once sang, you close your eyes, and for the first time since you arrived, you understand what it means to promise nothing. Except return. You're almost back to where it all began. The path curves in that familiar way now. Reeds brushing your arms like old friends, the squash vines waving with their now obvious personalities, the scarecrow by the cornfield giving you a nod you're not entirely sure is imagined. And still, the gardener says nothing. But you know why. This is the part where you begin to let go. Before you step onto the final Chinampa, He leads you to a narrow stretch of path you hadn't noticed before, just wide enough for two people, flanked by tall grasses and scattered lily petals that look like they were arranged by wind. At the end of this path stands a small sign, not painted, not carved, braided from reeds. It reads, Inamuri. He waits to see if you'll ask. You do. Isn't that Japanese? He smiles. A cousin. You've arrived at the Echo Garden. This is where the chinampa remembers not just its own roots, but those that traveled across time and sea to new islands and strange cities and never quite forgot how to rest. Because yes, long after the chinampas began to fade, the spirit of these floating gardens found a new shape, a new culture, a new nap. In modern Japan, Inamuri, the art of sleeping while present, became a quiet echo of chinampa life. It's not laziness, it's not escape, it's rest within activity. It's what the beans taught you, it's what the compost whispered, it's what the ducks demonstrated, occasionally by accident. And now you see it. Here in this quiet plot, lined with water and willows, farmers rest beside their crops. They lie beside the soil, not to work, not to plan, but to be. Some nap, some hum. One simply watches the wind move across the surface of the lake like a hand smoothing a blanket. The gardener gestures for you to lie down. You do. The ground is soft, familiar, slightly warm. Above you, dragonflies spin their slow, lazy ballet. The wind tells you things you don't need to understand. A scarecrow watches from a respectful distance. This is not a goodbye. This is a pause. Because Inamuri isn't about leaving, it's about resting while still belonging. The gardener lies beside you now. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. You feel it all. The bean vines you named, the ducks that forgave you, the compost pile that took your silence and made it grow, the dream you filed and the stone that still remembers it. Everything present. Everything here. Tomorrow, you'll return, not just to the beginning, but to yourself. To a final moment of reflection. To the garden that waited not for your labor, but for your presence. But tonight, you close your eyes. You don't fall asleep. You simply rest. And for the first time, you understand, in a world that grows with listening, with patience, with quiet dreams and careful names, doing nothing isn't wasting time. It's watering it. And now, you're back where you started. The same patch of earth, the same quiet mat woven from reeds, the same ducks, perhaps a little wiser, perhaps a little fatter, watching you with the calm of those who've seen entire seasons pass in a single blink. The light is low, the water is glass. The scarecrow stands taller tonight, as if satisfied with how far you've come. You lower yourself onto the mat. It sighs beneath you like a page turning. Your hands touch the soil, warm, familiar, still flecked with the tiniest memory of ash and flower. A single squash vine curls nearby. It doesn't ask for attention. It just exists, coiled in a perfect spiral, complete, undemanding. The gardener sits beside you one last time. No lesson, no gesture, just presence. You lie back, look up. The stars are blooming now, thousands of silent ancestors staring down with the quiet pride of compost piles that once dreamed they'd be gardens. You remember everything, the lettuce that listened, the chili rose that guarded like tiny spicy soldiers, the bean vines that only grew sweeter when spoken to, the scarecrow that might have winked, the duck revolution, brief but glorious, the dream bell, the compost ceremony, the whisper of thank you from the soil itself. All of it, still here, still growing, even now beneath your fingertips. The gardener exhales softly beside you. It's time, you nod, not to leave, not to end, but to close your eyes, because the journey of a floating garden isn't measured in steps or harvests. It's measured in the space between breaths, the silence between dreams, the softness between seasons. You draw in one last inhale, smelling lake water, warm soil, bean flowers, duck feathers, maybe even a touch of fish-based nobility. And as you exhale slowly, fully, you feel it, the chinampa exhaling with you, the whole floating world sinking into sleep. No questions left. No roots left untended, no dreams left unplanted. Just stillness, just soil, just sleep. Now let your breath fall into rhythm with the water. Let your thoughts dissolve like flower petals in compost. Let your fingers uncurl like leaves at dusk. And let the chinampa cradle you like it's known you forever. Like it's always known you, because maybe it has. End of script. Sweet dreams.